Men who grew up in the 1970s were shaped by a world very different from today, and that difference left deep psychological marks. This was a time before constant digital noise, before social media validation, and before emotions were openly discussed. Life felt slower, but it was harder in many unseen ways. For boys growing up during this decade, strength was not a personality trait, it was a requirement. Vulnerability was rarely encouraged, and emotional expression was often mistaken for weakness. As a result, many men from this era learned early that survival meant silence, endurance, and self-control. In the 1970s, authority was rarely questioned. Parents, teachers, and institutions held unquestioned power, and discipline was direct, sometimes harsh. For young boys, this created a psychological framework where obedience was linked to safety and resistance often led to punishment. Over time, this trained the mind to suppress impulses and comply rather than challenge. Many men who grew up in this era developed an internal belief that the world does not negotiate, it demands. This belief still influences how they respond to authority, conflict, and responsibility today. Emotional neglect was not usually intentional, but it was common. Fathers were providers first, emotionally distant by necessity or conditioning, while mothers were expected to manage the household without questioning the system. Boys rarely heard language that helped them identify feelings. Instead of being asked how they felt, they were told how to behave. This lack of emotional vocabulary didn't make emotions disappear, it pushed them inward. As adults, many men from the 1970s struggled to articulate stress, sadness, or fear, often expressing emotional overload through silence, anger, or physical exhaustion instead. Another defining psychological trait of this generation is resilience born from exposure rather than protection. Children in the 1970s experienced more independence at a younger age. They walked to school alone, solved problems without adult supervision, and learned consequences through real-world feedback. While this built confidence and adaptability, it also created a mindset where asking for help felt unnecessary or even shameful. Many men from this era carry the belief that real strength means handling everything alone, even when support would be beneficial. The economic uncertainty of the 1970s also played a major role in shaping the male psyche. Inflation, job instability, and social change created an atmosphere where security felt fragile. Men growing up in this period often witnessed financial stress at home, even if it was never openly discussed. This led to a strong association between self-worth and productivity. For many of these men, being useful became more important than being understood. Rest felt undeserved, and personal value became tightly linked to work, discipline, and sacrifice. Competition was another silent teacher. Without digital entertainment, comparison happened in physical spaces, schoolyards, sports fields, and neighborhoods. Status was earned through toughness, skill, or reputation. This reinforced a psychology where respect had to be maintained, not requested. Losing face carried real consequences, so emotional restraint became a form of self-protection. Even today, many men from the 1970s are highly sensitive to respect and may withdraw or harden emotionally when they feel undermined. One of the darker psychological outcomes of this upbringing is emotional isolation. Because emotional expression was limited and support systems were minimal, many men learned to internalize stress. Over decades, this can lead to chronic tension, suppressed anxiety, or a sense of emptiness that is difficult to explain. These men often appear calm on the surface, but internally they carry unresolved emotional weight. They are not unaware of their emotions, they were simply never taught how to safely release them. At the same time, this generation developed a powerful sense of duty. Responsibility was non-negotiable. If something needed to be done, it was done, regardless of mood or motivation. This created men who are reliable, consistent, and disciplined. However, it also produced a tendency to neglect personal needs. Many men from this era prioritize obligations over well-being, viewing self-care as indulgent rather than necessary. Communication styles were also shaped by the era. Conversations were direct, often minimal. There was little emphasis on emotional nuance or psychological exploration. This can cause friction today, especially in a world that values emotional intelligence and open dialogue. Men from the 1970s may appear emotionally distant or closed off, not because they lack empathy, but because they were trained to communicate through actions rather than words. The relationship between control and safety is another key psychological pattern. For many men who grew up in the 1970s, control equals stability. Uncertainty triggers discomfort because early life taught them that unpredictability leads to consequences. This can manifest as rigidity in routines, resistance to rapid change, or discomfort with emotional unpredictability. In modern environments that value flexibility and constant adaptation, this can create internal stress. Despite these challenges, the psychological strength of this generation should not be underestimated. These men are often mentally tough, patient, and capable of enduring long-term pressure without external validation. They are less dependent on approval and more grounded in internal standards. However, this strength often comes at the cost of emotional fulfillment. Many learned how to survive, but not how to reflect. As society evolves, the psychology of men who grew up in the 1970s sits at a crossroads. They carry values that are increasingly rare: discipline, responsibility, and endurance. Yet they live in a world that rewards openness, adaptability, and emotional expression. This mismatch can create confusion and frustration. Some adapt by slowly relearning emotional language, while others retreat further into silence. Understanding this psychology is not about judging the past, but recognizing its impact. These men were shaped by a system that valued function over feeling. Their emotional restraint is not a flaw. It is a learned survival mechanism. When viewed through this lens, their behavior becomes more understandable and their struggles more visible. In the end, men who grew up in the 1970s represent a generation forged by pressure, shaped by silence, and defined by responsibility. Their psychology reflects a world where strength meant endurance and emotions were carried quietly. As modern culture continues to change, understanding this mindset is essential, not to criticize it, but to bridge the gap between resilience and emotional awareness.